Here.
In a month.
Okay.
I'm happy to give you all the records. Rob has all that info. I don't think you're paying me that much a month.
Welcome everyone to the Police Services Board for Strathroy-Caradoc meeting of November 19th, 2024. We're a minute too late. We're just sorting out a technical issue. Thank you for your patience. Number one is roll call. Everyone is present, but we are one person down from what we normally are. Member Henry Wiersma informed me recently that unfortunately he had to withdraw from the board due to personal reasons, and we would like to, first of all extend, our regrets that that has to happen. But we want to thank Henry very much for his years of service. He's always provided a very interesting take on police matters, and he always had some good questions. And we just really want to thank him for all the work he's done over the years, and for him to enjoy, his time with family. So with that said, that's number one. Number two, the approval of the agenda. Do we have a mover? Moved by the mayor, seconded by Matt Hall, that we approve the agenda. All those in favor? Thank you very much. On to declarations of pecuniary interest. Are there any today? Seeing none, we can proceed on to the reading and correction or approval of the minutes. We have item 4.1, the general meeting minutes of October the 23rd, 2024. Could I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Matt Hall, seconded by the mayor, that we approve these minutes. All those in favor? Thank you very much. And now on to communications. And we have several. I'm just going to go through them in order, just for the sake of us being methodical here. We're going to receive them for information in a moment, but we'll just go through them. Does anybody have any comments on 5.11, enforce amendments? Seeing none. Item 5.12, Crime Prevention Week 2024. Any comments or questions? 5.13, Provincial Pool of Multi-Jurisdictional Major Case Managers. Any comments or questions on that one? 5.14, Ontario Anti-Hate Security and Prevention Grant 2024-2025. Questions or comments? 5.15, Stolen Valor, Unlawful Use of Military Uniforms or Certificates. Any questions or comments? 5.16, Next Generation 9-11, NG9-11, Notification Transition. Any questions? See none. 5.17, Ontario Regulation 8724 amendments. Seeing none. And finally, 5.1.8, Auxiliary Program Survey. I do have one question about that. I think that was an all-chiefs memo that went out, and there was a brief questionnaire attached to it. I guess I would ask the chief, Chief, is that something that you are going to respond to, or do you need any board input on that?
Thank you, Chair. So through the chair to the board, I haven't looked at the auxiliary program survey, only in that we don't run an auxiliary program. So I'm not sure if services who are absent of providing that service have a requirement to complete that. I will take a quick glance at that when I get back to the office. Yeah, if required, we'll complete the survey. Yeah,
I had looked at it. I think it's like 4 questions. I know we don't have one, but I just looked at it and said, gee whiz, I don't know if we're supposed to even respond to this, but if you take care of that, I think that'll be more than satisfactory. It kind of looked like a nothing burger for us because we don't have one, but thank you for that. But I figured we'd ask and get it answered here. Okay, so thank you very much, everyone. So the recommendations, the communications be received for information. Do we have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Matt, seconded by the mayor. All those in favor? Carried. Okay, thank you. That takes us down to, I think, number 6, if I'm not mistaken, and that's the review of monthly police service reports. And I guess, first of all, I would just ask that the monthly reports 6.1 to 6.5 be received for information. Moved by Member Hahn, seconded by Member Hall. All those in favor? carried. And now the floor is yours, Chief, to walk us through those as you see fit.
Again, thanks, Chair. A couple of highlights, and then I think I'll defer to obviously making myself or the deputy available for questions from the board members. So just a quick glance at the activity report. You'll see that the month of October was a fairly heavy month with 67 criminal charges laid. That's a little bit higher than what you see in previous Octobers over the previous 3 years. And you'll see that for the year, 244 total charges, which again, sort of aligns with where we've been certainly the last couple of years. More recently, I've been part of discussions at the OACP level with the Assistant Attorney General from the Ministry of the Attorney General as the sector is looking at the Disclosure Protocol Agreement, which is basically a governance document that provides guidance to policing services on how they provide disclosure to their local Crown Attorney's office. And so I just want to tie this back into the number of charges that we are laying and how we are meeting those obligations for disclosure and making sure that we are providing the evidence in a timely fashion so that the prosecutors have that case well in advance so that they can then make and have discussions with defense counsel and any other justice sector partners to ensure that the best results are occurring in our courts. So I just wanted to sort of highlight that. In the Uniform Crime Reporting Violations, so that's the UCR report, a couple of trends I've noticed in here. Certainly our person crimes and property crimes. When you look at the year-over-year data, we are down in both those areas, which I think are positive signs, particularly in the property-related offenses. 288 reported to date in 2024, well below where we've been certainly in the previous 3 years. And again, a bit of a shout out to our frontline members in that proactive policing patrols, providing that deterrence and hopefully being that visible cue that is keeping the criminal element from being involved in our communities. And certainly anytime that you see a bit of a dip in the crimes against persons, so assaults, sexual assaults, robberies, those are good indicators. We are holding steady when it comes to traffic-related type occurrences. So both the motor vehicle collisions and other traffic criminal, which obviously catches impaired driving, which is a number that's a little bit higher than where we've been certainly the previous 3 years. And as I've said at previous meetings, I think those numbers are in part driven by the very engaged community that we have that are very involved in calling in suspicious or potential impaired drivers and providing that information in a timely fashion so that we can go out, we can intercept these drivers and initiate those traffic stops and potentially take it down the path of proceeding with impaired charges. So again, recognition of the very engaged community we have. The other area, or the other report I wanted to highlight falls inside the Criminal Investigation Division report, and it's bullet point 3, and it related to a missing person who left the local hospital here. Again, I want to acknowledge the great work of not only our uniform division, who were very diligent, very proactive in ensuring that we dedicated several resources to locating this elderly female patient, but also some of our outside resources, other policing services, and in particularly our local fire service, who were very instrumental in aiding and assisting us in some of the ground search that was initially undertaken. And again, you'll see in the summary that it was a very successful conclusion in that the patient was located early the next morning and returned to the hospital. And my understanding is that they've instituted some additional measures to ensure that not only that patient but others don't sort of have access to leaving the premises without proper notifications being made. So I'll maybe just pause there and take any questions from any of the board as they have.
Thank you very much, Chief. And that last item of reporting on the ground search was actually, I think, a really great example how in our community our emergency forces and the hospital can cooperate together. And I think we're lucky in that the locus of community control is very close to home, and the coordination I think is eased by the fact that our forces are familiar with each other, and we have a lot of personnel at the hospital, the fire department, and the police department. I mean, they all know each other, and I think it was a really great effort. It showed great cooperation, and we were also very lucky that the temperatures didn't get too low that night. Anyway, thank you, and I'm over to Member Hahn for her question.
Question directed to the chief. And again, in the criminal investigation report, the very last item where it said the external police agency assistance, requiring some assistance from the OPP cybercrime unit. Could you just elaborate on that? It's one of those lines we don't generally see in the report.
Sorry, I'm just trying to. Which report are you referencing? Sorry,
I thought it was the criminal investigation. You read bullet number 3, and I was going right to the very bottom of that report, the stats, under the stats, and then the very last bullet point, external police agency assistance.
Oh yeah, sorry. I see where you're referencing. So that relates to I believe it's still an ongoing investigation at one of our local businesses that really involves sort of the penetration into a commercial system. They initially had reached into, I believe, the OPP to report the issue. They then made us aware, so we then commenced the investigation. But because it involved some international related ties, the OPP cybercrime, which is part of the provincial policing strategy, which every taxpayer in the province of Ontario has access to those services, those provincial services that the OPP coordinate. We decided to reach back in and utilize some of their technology and capacity to help us investigate this incident.
Thank you, Member Hahn. And the Mayor has a question.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, and not related to the stats in front of us, but last meeting we talked about KPI and response time. So my question is to you, what is the possibility of getting that? Where are we? And the second part of that would be, out of all the stats, KPIs we have, which ones could we use, or are there ones to show the health of our organization versus other organizations? So a two-parter, Chief.
So thanks, and again through the chair to the mayor. In relation to the KPIs about response times, we're working with our colleagues out of Sarnia who have some programming that we're looking to implement that will certainly make extracting that data a lot easier, and then formatting in a package that obviously we will then be able to present to the board to provide those details. In addition to that, Ron may be able to add some further light on this. I know that the Inspectorate of Policing is heading down this path to use or look at response time data as an assessment about the adequacy and effectiveness of policing services in the province. It's still in the early stages. In fact, we were supposed to have a call, the OACP, yesterday with the Inspectorate of Policing to sort of massage where that discussion was going to go. It was put off, and we're having that Friday instead. So I do think that it is coming as far as one of the areas of inspection. So we're already exploring how do we gain that information and make it accessible for our board and our staff internally, so that we can then help prioritize perhaps patrol planning, enforcement areas, and just strategic planning about where we want to be. Your second question about, I think, how do we sort of use those KPIs to sort of assess or look at the health of our organization compared to others. Again, I think that the cachet of resources that Sarnia is going to be able to provide to us in this analytics software application is going to give us a very clear picture of where we are operating here locally, but then it allows us to sort of compare to some of those other services who are extracting the same data for their own purposes.
Perfect. Great answer, thank you.
Great answer. And did Ron LeClaire, did you want to have a comment on that, Ron? So your name was mentioned. Okay. I can't hear you, Ron. Ron, we can't hear you.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now. I don't know that I have much more to add to the chief's comments related to that direction. It is certainly a direction that the board, or sorry, the IOP is definitely interested in pursuing, and it came up at the Zone 6 meeting and was presented as a very rough sketch at this point. And while I'm on the mic, Chief, you do not have to look at the auxiliary survey. It's only for agencies that have auxiliaries.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
And just a comment from the chair, KPIs and that sort of stats, I think, are going to be very helpful to municipal police board chairs when police budgets come in front of council. Sometimes the comparisons in costs between different municipal police boards are bandied about without adequate discussion of response times in these KPIs. So I think it's important for us to have that information to demonstrate that you know, the money that we're spending on emergency services is well used, and we have an excellent response time. Maybe there's other jurisdictions where they have response times issues and they're spending significantly less money on their resources. So I think it's apples and oranges sometimes when we look at these comparisons of just about amount of money spent on police forces as a percentage of total municipal budget without looking at KPIs. That's just an editorial comment here. But I know when we take a look at our police budget and it comes in front of our council, we will arm ourselves as best we can with those sorts of statistics. Member Hahn.
Just as a comment also to response times, I know that the mayor raised it in last month's meeting in regards to Ward 1 and Ward 2, even seeing if there was a variance in there. However, I noted also on, and we'll talk about that likely later, under number 9, Inspectorate of Policing, the information collection. And I believe as board, we have to complete some of these questions by November 25th or something of that. But one of the questions is about response times, and it says the IOP is beginning research on response times, and we are looking to incorporate views from police service boards across the province. But the question I really was interested in, and maybe the chief could comment on it, was the part 2. It says, in the last 12 months, how many service complaints has the board received from the public regarding response times or calls for service? And I was just wondering, do we receive very many?
So through the chair to Member Hahn, I think that is referencing complaints that go directly to the board, talking about service level complaints. I'm not aware of any that have been received by our board in the last 12 months. To hazard a guess, I think the last service complaint is probably well over 6 or 7 years ago. And I think it had to do in relation to a policy-related complaint.
I'm sorry.
A policy-related complaint.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm the chair and I've never seen any such complaint. I'm sure it would have been sent to me by a member of the public or by the chief if they'd been received, so I've never seen one.
Sorry, Chair, and if I may, and again, not to put Mr. Leclerc on the hot spot here, but I think since the enactment of the Act back April 1st, the Inspectorate of Policing has received well over, I think it's 300 complaints, if I'm correct. And again, not one I think has landed here locally in relation to our service.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So we're dealing with all items under section 6. Are there any other comments on items 6.1 through 6.5, which we have already accepted for information before we move on to section 7? Any more questions? Member Hahn?
I'll go then to the 2024 budget update, and it's just a comment, and it relates back to also the civilian hours in October for WSIB, and I noted under the civilian WSIB cost, the payout that did proceed from our discussions previous. So it's just a comment, because I saw the zero under WSIB situations in the month of October. So it's just a comment for our board to be aware of.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, well, if that's it for item 6, then items under 6, and we've already accepted them for information, I guess we're free to go on to section 7. I always look over at Jennifer to make sure I'm proceeding correctly. I've forgotten something. And so we now move on to a big item, item 7.1, the revised 2025 proposed budget. And the recommendation, and we'll get it on the floor, that the board receive the revised 2025 proposed budget for information. Do I have a mover? Moved by Member Hahn, seconded by the Mayor. All those in favor? Carried. With that said, it's on the floor, and Chief, if you would like to walk us through some of Chief, if you would like to walk us through some of this, that'd be great.
Thanks again, Chair. So, building on what was discussed at the October meeting, the overall budget numbers haven't changed. They're still, as far as the general taxation, an increase of 2.95%. That overall number has not changed since the last meeting. There were some requests made to have some representation of services that the police service is utilizing as far as municipal staff. So I will draw your attention to, in the police building expenses, we've created a new additional budget line referencing or named future needs, which provides for a year-over-year operating budget line to address building requirements that fall outside of what would be normal or deemed capital expenses. So that is a new addition. We have in the police IT expense line, this isn't new from last meeting, but I wanted to highlight it to the board members. We have moved 100,000 of our Axon operating technology expenses into our operating area as well. So that's where you see that that increase of $100,000 in that budget expense line. Other areas in the administrative expenses area, in the admin general expenses, again, I have created an additional expense line, municipal administrative services, which is reflective of tapping into both the human resources and the finance department areas here at Town Hall. If I can just take you back, sorry, to the police IT expenses. The first two budget lines in that area, the information technology and the contracted IT, you don't see it in the wording of the expense lines, but those both touch the IT services that the municipality provides to the policing services. So those three distinct areas, again, I just wanted to highlight to the board. From an overall increase, there are, so obviously a majority of our operating expenses fall in our police uniform expense line.
Mm-hmm.
There is an overall increase of $214,000 in our police uniform expenses. A majority of that is in the 2.5% salary increase in the collective bargaining agreement for the year 2025, which is applied to the full-time salary lines there. In addition, there is one additional recruit that we're looking to add to our overall complement. And again, that recruit will come in at a initial salary area of around $75,000. So that's the uniform expense area. On the civilian expense area, due to the increased 911 services that we're providing to the county, we made this change back earlier in the year where we changed some of our part-time employees to full-time employee status. So that's why you see the 14% change in the full-time salary lines. Correspondingly, you see obviously a bit of a dip in the part-time salary dollars that we would then be required, because a majority of our communication staff now are being, those services are now being provided by full-time staff. So an overall increase of just over $111,000 in our civilian expenses. So the total overall expense increase is $570,000, 394 of which is salaries and benefits. So that leaves really an overall increase of just over $176,000 in our overall operating budgets outside of salaries and benefits. So that's sort of a brief summary of the operating budget presented, and again with those modifications that were made last meeting in regards to clearly identifying where we have touch points to municipal services here at Town Hall.
Thank you for that, Chief, and I'd like to, on behalf of the board, thank you for the responsiveness of yourself and Finance Director Dakin for helping us once again better reflect the true cost of policing in our community, and to understand people who are watching that any budget is an iterative process. Each year we try to get more and more clear about what the costs actually are, and as good a job as we do it in any one given year, subsequent years we find a way to tweak it to become just a little bit more accurate, and I think we've taken a good step this year with a couple of those changes. I think the Mayor had a comment.
No, I'll echo your comments, Chair, about responsible budget. Just a couple of comments, and I have one question. I quickly looked, the rate of inflation in September 2.3, so we're just barely keeping up with the rate of inflation, Chair. But I also comment that our community is growing at 14%. I saw how rapidly our community is growing, so to have a police budget come in at 2.9 with 14% growth, to me is pretty commendable, and to me it does kind of allay the fears that some are going to have, and I apologize, I got a bit of a cold, about the cost of our policing. So, and I have an example, and it's a small one, Chair, if you indulge me. We're urbanizing very quickly, and I hear that word used at county council a lot. I hear it in news stories. So the more you become urbanized, the more you have to spend. And Chief, there was one little line that did jump out at me, and let's see where I can find it there. It's the drug intelligence line. And I know it's just a little one, but we're looking at the rate of increases. In 2022, I think it was $500. It's now $8,000, which I'm okay. It's just showing how rapidly, as we become urbanized, the needs on policing are changing. So I think it's a responsible budget, but I think, Chair, when I don't think we have to defend the budget, but talking about the budget, we need to remember those lines. 14% growth. We're becoming urbanized, and the needs of our police are changing. So I think it's a responsible budget. And I did have one question on the future needs of $45,000. Was that to reflect the possibility of a substation in Mount Bridges? Or was I looking at something different, Chief?
So through the chair to the mayor. So in discussions obviously with the Director of Finance, That's to fund future needs, future expansions, future upgrades of the facilities, whether it's our current headquarters facility or any additional facilities.
Okay. Sorry, Chief. So follow-up, so that leads me to my question then. I think it's important that we do is in 2025, and when the vice chair is chair, that we take the initiative of upgrading our visibility in Ward 2. And I'd like to see dollars parked to have money for the substation, whether it's rent or lease and the upgrades needed. I think that's a great initiative for 2025. It fits with the strat plan of both the police service and the municipalities. I don't know where we would find dollars in the budget to put in lease for a substation in Mount Bridges.
If I may respond to the mayor through the chair, I would like to actually undertake that exercise currently and at least start exploring with our municipal partners, identifying possible spaces and what constraints or opportunities actually are presented to us to have some better presence in facilities that maybe aren't off the main intersections there in Mount Bridges.
Okay. Thanks, and I guess I apologize, a follow-up, Chair. And just thinking, I know the Director of Finance, would the lease of such a place, would that be under our budget? Because I know it's the municipality's responsibility to give space to the police service. So the station now, that's municipal building. So if we were to do that, is it the responsibility of the police service to pay for that, or the municipality?
I can take a first
Okay.
swing at this.
Yeah.
So certainly, yes. So under the Act, the municipality is responsible for providing facilities. Whether the operation to stand up such a facility or the ongoing maintenance would probably sit in the police budget.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Chief. That's it. As you can tell, that's an important one to me, is to get something down, and we'll work on it next year.
Yep, already wrote it down.
Yes.
Thank you for that. And so it looks like at the moment, the operating budget is looking pretty good. We've had a few questions on it. And that leads us now, I think, in terms of our proposed budget, looking at where best in the agenda to put this. We're probably going to now talk about the capital budget, which leads us into the whole renovation of the police headquarters. So Chief, I'll throw that over to you. And I think we have an individual here who's going to talk to us about it. I'd like to introduce him and we can chat about that.
Yeah, so thanks, Chair. And again, it's two sides of the dinner plate, I'll call it. The operating budget, again, I wanted to take some time to, again, just sort of walk the board through how it was constructed and where some of those minor amendments were made. Certainly the other half of the police budget is the capital budget. And so year over year, we generally have a pretty consistent capital budget number. This year, obviously, the ask is to move forward with the building annex. So looking, obviously, hopefully a takeaway from the end of this meeting is an operating and a capital budget that is received by the board and approved by the board to allow it to then proceed to municipal council for the final review. So to sort of tee up, if I can use a golfing analogy here, the capital project or the capital budget portion, I want to introduce Mike Holt from A-Link, who is no stranger to the board, who was here about a year ago, providing some details on what the building annex looks like. He's here to provide some follow-up comments in relation to that. I know he has a presentation that he will be referencing with some details about some initial cost and where we are in relation to moving forward with some somewhat definitive but forecasting type prices. So if I can, I'll introduce or turn the floor over to Mike at the chair's discretion.
And one question from the chair. Approximately how long is your presentation, Mr. Holt?
10 minutes?
Super.
I know your grandkids
You know,
know.
while I'm sharing, I just like to ask people what they think the approximate, because I think it helps people listening to have an idea if we're in for 10 minutes or 45. So, okay, approximately 10 minutes, and we'll have some leeway on that, of course. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll be open to questions.
Really what he's saying is the mayor kept him here for 5.5 hours yesterday.
So Jennifer, I was able to get into Zoom. Can you make it so I can present? Is that possible? Otherwise, I'll try this dongle thing here.
You're made co-host, so you should be able to.
Perfect. Perfect, great, okay. Let's go full screen. Okay, so thank you for having me. So as Chief mentioned, the last presentation that I did for you was December 19th, so of last year, so obviously almost a year ago. So we haven't been working on the project at all since that presentation. But what this presentation is about today really is just a brief overview of what I presented in December, and then really talking about costs and kind of high level next steps, really. That's kind of where you're at. So as a blanket statement, really all projects that you do, whether you're renovating your own house or you're building an addition to the police station, or building a new fire station, it really consists of 3 elements. So there's scope, what are we doing, like what the project is, how much does it cost, and how long is it going to take? So time, cost, and scope. So we were hired for the phase 1 services, this would have been last year, for the design which I'll present to you, as well as the costing, and then the next steps and schedule. So that's what we've already produced. So with all projects, you got to find the balance between these 3. The triangle is always connected together, if you will. So if you want to build sooner, it might cost you more, right? Or if it costs too much money, you might have to decrease the scope of what you're actually doing, right? They all tie together. So what was the scope? This is a brief overview. Again, I don't want to go too much into the details of this because I really did this all the last presentation which we provided to you. But this is the scope here. So 911's communications center, larger actual IT room and server space, and a comms room as well. There's a training room. There's some offices. There's some workstations as well, work areas for officers. There's some renovations as well to the existing, which include a mental health office. And there's a complex reno as well, addition with the lunchroom, as well as there's indoor parking. I'm not going to go through the whole list, but there's a big, large list there. This is the existing building from the sky, so you can see how the site is laid out currently. So Francis Street is on the left-hand side. So as it loads in here, this is the scope, really, of the schematic design. So there's 4 elements. So there's blue, which is the minor renovated area. So really what that means is those are existing rooms where we're moving programming or what is happening in those rooms to another part of maybe of the addition. So it frees up that room in blue, if you will. But that room now, there's value in that room and it will turn into something else. The green rooms are the complex renovated area. So because we're building the addition, which is in yellow, next to an existing building, we have to address how we're making that connection, right? It's not as easy as just plopping a building down next to it. Strategically, you have to figure that out. And on top of that, we are adding potentially snow loading onto an existing building that was never accounted for an addition next to it, if that makes sense. So little things like that we have to look at. So the green spaces, they are renovated spaces within the existing footprint of the building, but the cost associated with that really is not the same as the blue spaces. They would cost a little bit more. So they're calculated differently when we do this level of costing. The yellow spaces, as I mentioned, is the addition. And the kind of orangey red space is the indoor parking addition. So it's also an addition, but it's different because its square footage cost would be much different than the yellow, which is the offices and the communications and the training center. So here is just an enlarged floor plan. Again, I'm not going to go into a massive amount of details on this, but just a high level. The way the existing building is orientated and the way the parking is situated, really we're extending the driveway around the outside of the addition, so it's just a continuation of what you have right now. Through that, we have to address the secure prisoner drop-off because we're making the connection of the addition, so you can see here, kind of in the north part of the building. We have a new lunchroom as the addition on the south side of the building with a private space here for lunch, and it's screened off as well for privacy and security. The green spaces, as I mentioned, are the complex reno spaces. So included in that are adding some washroom spaces that are associated with the lunchroom and making that main corridor connection through the building into the addition. We have to connect that in some way. In the addition itself, the way it's designed is really a T-shaped plan. So you have a main corridor that would take you at each end, and then you have your, we'll call it east-west corridor that connects into the existing corridor, into the existing building. And then that is a straight shot through into the parking at the back. This would be for marked and unmarked police vehicles. And there's a garage door on each end, so you can drive through and pull out. The north end of the addition is the new communications center. So your existing communications room is quite small, and just for future needs of police services, you know, the space is always a factor, and you'd be surprised at how large these desks are. We just finished a renovation for the backup communications center for the LPS, London Police Department, and we're working on their main comms downtown at Dundas, and these desks are quite large. They take up a lot of space. So again, the old infrastructure of our buildings, and as mentioned this to John before the meeting, the challenge in these buildings that were designed 40, 30 years ago, just the needs and how you police or how you even fight fires or even how you teach school, all of those needs have changed. And so you can see that with just the infrastructure costs that have come up. Even recreation centers is another great example, right? How we use spaces have changed in the last 40 years. So trying to fit more people into a small space is very challenging. I think, you know, the police department has really made a run at what you have, but really you're crunched for space. Included that is a training room at the south side of the building here. So currently, from what I understand, training is done off-site. So there's a cost to do that. So with having an own training room and space available, now potentially you're offsetting that cost as well, right? Having the space of your own. In the middle of the space is a workroom. Really, we spent a lot of time working with chief and deputy chief on how the spaces would function. So it's not as simple as just putting spaces on a page. This is a thought-out design of how the daily life would work in the space, parking the vehicle, coming in, dropping off your equipment, having your work area right here. It's very tight, it's very efficient. Having all the wet spaces, the washroom spaces clustered together. Having the ID space central, easy access for people to drop off, but also very secure and it's double layering. And then currently your IT closet, if you just take a tour of the existing police station, again, that's another thing, right? It's like these spaces were not designed for this technology. Now you're trying to shoehorn multiple server closets in a janitor's closet, really. Not super secure, no ventilation, no cooling, lots of problems. So we have a dedicated IT space as well here. Again, multiple layers within the building and secure. So high-level overview of the design. So with the design, again, part of this is to figure out, okay, what's the wish list? What do we need to make this work? Vetting those ideas, getting it on paper, getting some square footages, figuring out overall what the design could be as a starting point. You have to start somewhere, right? So on top of that, what we've produced is some massing or 3D images. We typically do this in our phase 1 scope as well because it helps paint the picture of what this finished product could be. Again, this is just one variation of it, right? Things change and morph as you continue with the project. But here's your existing building, looking, I guess, we'll call it from the south side. And then here is your addition. So really, you're almost doubling the square footage of what you have now. Granted, a good portion of that is indoor parking, right, which is this at the far end. So here's another view. And we do this as well because for the cost consultant, when we send this out for the first level of costing, which is the Class C costing in this project's lifespan, we need to know how tall the building is. We need to know what the features are. We need to relatively know what the construction materials are going to be. We have to figure out a good portion of the building. It's not all figured out, obviously, because this is only the front end of the design, but at least this gives you a flavor of what possibly it could be. So this is just an overview, the last slide here, of the scope and area and really the cost and what's associated with it. So each, again, we've outlined what the area is, what the cost estimate was for each of the portions, so it's clearly understandable. So we figure out what the design is, we vet it, and then we actually have a cost consultant provide the costing for it. So it's the third-party costing. Because this level of costing, we really want to have, someone that does this daily, really. So this is straight from their costing report. I'm not going to go through all this, but really it talks about each of the divisions. It talks about what the assumptions are, what what's not included, which I will talk about. So exclusions, that's at the last page here. So the budget that was produced doesn't have HST in it. You got to keep that in mind. There's also considerations that there's no abatement or hazardous materials removal, etc. So there's a bunch of items in here that they've assumed. Equipment costs, not included. So basically furnishings and fit up. So those need to be accounted for when you're doing a project budget. But for a first phase, a first kick, it's a healthy budget to start from. So the last page of the costing budget, and this is what I presented in December to everybody, looked like this. So just to refresh everyone's memory, across the top are your columns. We have our total budget on the far left-hand side, which totals at the bottom. So I can zoom in on it. Oops. I think I can zoom in on it. There we go. So currently it's 10.9 million, way down at the bottom, plus HST that's not included, so you gotta keep that in mind. And now all that total budget is a summary of all of the columns to the right-hand side, right? So each of these gets summarized because we wanna see what the pieces are relatively to each other, right? So your site cost equals 392. Your addition, so your yellow spaces, is 4.4 million. Your green spaces, so that how we connect, is 190. The minor renovations is just over 100K, and the total the orange parking, indoor parking, is 1.3. So that is your scope, right? That's what's on the drawings. So if your scope increases, then the total budget at the bottom would increase. If you cut scope, the number goes down. That's pretty rudimentary thinking in that sense. In the middle is an allowances, which is 750K. So again, because we're doing, we do all our projects this way, we work through the design, figure out what you want, get it costed. Does everyone feel comfortable with the pathway that we're going? Yes or no? If you do feel comfortable, then we can proceed and hire the engineering team and start working on design development. This will lead into next steps. There's a whole procedure that happens in architecture, or process if you will, where we are working on the project and then we actually have milestone costing, and I'll speak about that shortly. But currently, because there's a lot of unknowns, really, right, we have a contingency factor, if you will. So that's in the middle. The 4 columns on the right-hand side all have to do with the contractor. So including that would be the insurance and bonding. So you need to have insurance and bonding on a project. So really what that is a percentage factor off of the scope costs. Same thing with the GC markup at this point. You got to remember that this project will be competitively tendered. You don't necessarily have to go with the lowest bidder. Most do in public situations. So when it's a competitive bid, and if it's a hungry market, that fee will be low, ideally, right? There's also a contingency as well built into here because of that unknown factor. So that's 1.4 million, right? There's a huge, and that's a percentage off of the bottom line, which I think was close to, supposed to be 10%, give or take, because we don't have all the design figured out. As we do more and more of the work, and you get other layers of costing, this number goes down, the contingency, right? Because we are making the unknowns known, and then they actually get priced out. So those prices would then get built into the actual scope, if you will. General conditions is another factor for the GC. So those are the two that the GC would carry, including insurance. So really it's those three items as GC. The contingency is a total project contingency, if you will. So that's how it's broken up at the bottom here as well. So it's basically 10 million once you add up all these line items. Then you have to add project design fees. This is purely just an estimate only. That's not a known quantity because we haven't gone to multiple engineers to get their pricing. We haven't actually bid on this project at all. We just put it in as a factor because you need to know that exists. Building permit and development charges is a question because it's a municipal project. Are you exempt from those? Potentially you are, but again, just for safety factor, we always put it in. It could be removed. And then we have the total project total. Now remember, this budget was produced in 2023, right? So a year ago-ish. So in that total contingency as well, it was built in an escalation amount, which means we knew that you were not constructing it in 2023. We knew you were constructing in 2024. So escalation percentage was factored in on the bottom line because you have to be realistic, right? So where are we at right now? This is kind of the timeline of really all projects, but particularly this project. So schematic design has been complete. We're right here. So that includes the scope, as I showed, the costs, and then the timeline. So timeline for construction as well, it is built into that budget. It was basically 40 to 50 weeks, which give or take, it's going to be about a year construction. So part of that, you have to think about how to phase the construction because it's an operating facility. So how do you make construction and an occupied facility work? And we do that all the time. So the next steps for the project, this is the lifespan of really of all projects. We have design development. So what does that mean? Design development means further development of design is exactly what it's called. So we have this schematic design, that's all well and good, but now we actually have to start creating the actual building assemblies. We have to hire all the engineering teams, which is the structural engineer, mechanical, electrical, civil, potentially landscape, maybe not on this project. Potentially securities and communications as well. Consultant, there's a bunch of consultants that we'd want to look at for this. So what that first chunk of work means is we would hire them on, they would address the design and really provide their schematic design and kind of high-level look at the project. Then what we do, along with us further developing the design, as a milestone, we get a Class B costing, which I've noted here at the bottom. So for the schematic design, we had a Class C costing. At the end of design development, we have a Class B costing. So that's a factor of about 15% plus or minus, where, as an example, Class C is a factor typically of about 25%. So the idea is, again, as you're developing the design, you know more, you can get it costed as a checkpoint. So great examples, we did this for the fire hall, which is under construction right now. We actually had 3 levels of costing on that project. So the third level, is a Class A costing, and that is within the construction documentation phase. So if we get a Class B costing, for instance, on this project, we can now compare it against our Class C costing, and you can say, okay, are we on the right track? We haven't invested all of our time in a design and doing all this work, and we want to make it affordable, right? So do we need to cut scope or pivot in order to make it affordable? Then if everyone feels like, hey, we're on the right track, great. Then we could proceed into construction drawings, which really is building permit drawings and tender drawings for the contractor. And at the end of that, if you want another checkpoint, we would do a Class A costing. And that is basically a pre-tender cost estimate. And its factor is plus or minus about 10 to 5% or so. So it's the most accurate without actually going to the street, if you will, and going to a contractor for pricing. We did that as well for the fire station. The idea with that, again, with the fire station is a great example because local. We did the Class C costing, did the schematic design. Okay, do we feel comfortable with this value? Yes, okay, proceed. And then each checkpoint, it went through council to approve it. In that situation, we were under, and then when it went actually out for tender, it's under, like way under. So that's how we work because you're always checking against what the actual costs are, and then making adjustments if you have to. After the tender goes out, there's the tender period, which means you're actually going out to the streets, you're either pre-qualifying contractors or you're going out on bids and tenders to all contractors. Kind of depends on how you want to procure that. But what that means is procurement and award to the GC. And then there's the construction phase. And in the timeline of an actual project, graphically, like this is about the timeline for like my work. A lot of our work happens in design development and construction documentation. Construction in the duration of the project is really the longest, right? Because construction could be a year, it could be 18 months, depending on the complexity of the project, right? So in the timeline, that actually is the longest in reality. And then there's project completion, and included in that would be occupancy and testing of the building and all that. So really, that's the next steps. It's a big sort of milestone, if you will, to jump into design development. Really the question, I guess, back to the board and as well as the police team is the comfort factor of where are we at with the design, where are we at with the budget, are we comfortable, do we want to proceed to the next stages, and then again get those costing milestones set in place. So anyways, I'll open up to questions. That was probably more than 10 minutes, John, I'm sorry.
But that's okay, I doubled it in my head when you said that.
Typical architect.
Because, based on past experience. Before we go with comments and questions from council, does the chief have any comments or questions before we proceed with the comments and questions from council? From the board.
No, thanks, Chair, for the opportunity. I think I'll let the board maybe ask some questions or provide some comments, and then I'll defer and try, and then weigh in at the end.
Before we go with comments and questions, I'll just indulge my privilege as chair and say, essentially I see in front of us then, we're being asked to make a decision about whether we want to proceed in the process toward a Class B costing. Is that essentially what we're looking at right now? That's what we're discussing in terms of the current budget that we're going to be putting before council?
If you decide to, right? So it's not a requirement at all. Some projects, we would only do a Class C costing at the end of schematic, and if everyone's comfortable, we just roll forward. There's a time commitment and a cost commitment to adding a Class B costing, if that makes sense.
But is that required that we go to a Class B costing?
No.
No.
It's a checkpoint, and we recommend it.
Okay.
But it's definitely not required.
Okay.
So costing typically takes about a month. So when we build our schedules, our project schedules and timeline, we would build that in if it's included or not included.
I guess my question for clarity before we start talking is in terms of proceeding with this project and ideally having things happen in 2025 and 2026, are we being asked today to make a decision if we want to proceed with all of this? And if so, what's the resolution that we're looking at here right now? And if we want to proceed with this, what are we supposed to do today? Just do carte blanche, or just say that we're just going to a certain point in the process?
So sorry, maybe I can provide some guidance or clarity on what I'm hoping the board will give some consideration to, and that is, my role is to bring an operating and a capital budget to the Police Services Board for their review, their information review, and then potential approval. What I am looking to do is to have the board approve both the operating and a capital expenditure that captures our more routine capital expenditures, upwards to $720,000, plus the approval of the capital expenditure to proceed with the building annex. I will maybe defer to the Director of Finance, who has participated in more of the overall capital planning.
But before we do that, that clarifies something for me as chair, all right? Then I see we're looking at two separate motions, I think. We're looking at a motion to approve the operating and capital budget for everything with the exception of the new renovation, and then a separate discussion for the renovation. So I like to get things off the table. So what I would like to do then is, just before we continue with that, is to have a brief discussion with the board and say, are we comfortable in doing the first of those two things, which is to approve essentially the 2025 proposed budget, that's capital and operating as presented, before we proceed with the discussion of the funding of the renovation. Member Hahn.
I so bring forward that motion.
Okay, so it's moved, and do we have a seconder? Seconded by Matt Hahn. And all those, any discussion?
Just a comment, I like your logic, Chair, because it's good logic, so.
I'm a cat, I like to push things off the table. Exactly. So, okay, so with that said, and that comment, call the motion. All those in favor? Carried. Okay, so we have now done that. And now we'll go over to Director Dakin with the clarifications on what's involved with the second item, which is proceeding with the capital requirements of the proposed renovation of the police headquarters.
Thank you, Chair. So through the Chair to the board. So currently in the police budget is $500,000 to keep this project moving. That was in 2024. So I think we've spent maybe 40,000, 50,000 of that. So there is room in the budget current from last year, already already approved, already allocated, that could be used to move to the next level of the cost B, even possibly even cost C, cost A. So that's in place. Then the next step obviously would be, once we get those numbers, we've already got a number around the 10 million mark that we can put as a placeholder. In fact, I think last year we actually put in a placeholder of the 9 million, because we had $1 million sitting in reserves that we were going to offset. So we were looking at a loan for around 9 million. So we're already down that path. You already have money in your budget currently that could proceed to the next step if you want to sort of methodically work through using the cat analogy, knock the Class B off the table. Then that money's sitting there. So I think we're already down that path a bit. So I think that would be the best way to.
And then a question from the mayor.
Yeah, sorry, Chair, but I'm just wondering if we're getting too granular for the purposes of the board. I mean, a lot of what we're discussing, it's even looking at Mike's, the next step, a lot of that is relevant to the municipality. But looking at our function as a board in terms of, you know, Class B costs, I think we're getting too down into the weeds. I think we know, you know, Mike will tell us, he said 15% bounce on a Class B. I think we have enough information to take it to council and as a police board to make a recommendation, because again, our job as a police board is to make the recommendation to the municipality and let them come back with you know, things like the Class B costing and that. But again, that's my thing. We're getting too granular as a police board, that we have a number, and I'll make comments about needs and then that, but I think that's not our concern, for lack of a better word, Chair. We should make the recommendation, if we so choose, that we'd like to proceed with the addition, the renovation of the police station. Here's the number that we're looking at, and then let municipal council worry about whether, you know, the Class B and all of that. Thanks, Chair.
Comment would be, I agree. Should we put a date on that? You know, that basically, is it the goal of this police board that the renovation of the police headquarters be completed by a certain date? Do we want to say something like that to council, or are we just saying we're moving ahead with the process?
Comment, Chair, I would say I'd leave it for them. I think you give it too much leeway. I think our recommendation should just be, we're recommending the completion of the addition.
Would you like to make that a motion, Mr. Mayor?
I will make that motion, Chair, that the police board recommends to the municipal council that we proceed with the addition / renovation of our police service headquarters. And I don't have the amount, Chair. I don't know if you think we need to put the amount in.
I think the amount was said was in budget already.
It's in the budget,
We're
right?
using existing funds already in budget.
Yes.
Might be appended to the motion, looking at the Director of Finance. Okay, yes, Member Hahn.
I would like in that motion to put that figure 10.1 or what, sorry, also in that motion. That the renovation cost of, 10.1, 10.934, or,
So the mayor made the motion, who was the seconder?
oh, I'll second that.
No, but the mayor made the original motion, did we have a seconder already, or? No, okay, we're not there yet. Okay, so, the mayor hasn't made the motion yet, so, you're in the process of
I
making the
didn't make,
motion.
okay, so I will make the motion, and I am purposely gonna leave out the dollar amount.
Okay, so the mayor has made the motion, that we go ahead with it using existing money already in budget, and you don't want to indicate a dollar figure on the project.
No.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, looking for a seconder. Moved by member Hahn. Discussion.
Oh, sorry. I would still like to ask, or would it not be prudent to advise the council what the anticipated cost could be, and even have it as per the proposal by A-Link for 10.93 or whatever, so that they have an understanding of what that value is?
I think that money would that figure be included in information to council when we go to council? It wouldn't have to necessarily be in the motion, but it would be, council would be informed of that number? Yeah, so council will know that number. I'm being told that, right? It just won't be in the motion. The mayor's making a comment.
Just in response, Yannick, I worry that if you put in a number, because there's all inflation, there's construction creep in that we tend to be tying our hands a little bit, and knowing members of council. That's just my fears, that we're gonna be boxing ourselves in somewhat by giving a number.
Member Hahn.
So would I be correct in understanding that that motion is solid in saying we as board are asking the municipal council we would like to proceed with this based on the presentation brought forward without a dollar value, and using the interim funds to start the process, but I'd like to know that they have approved it.
So I guess I can ask the question, would we be willing to have the presentation made by Mr. Holt and those figures provided to council for their consideration?
I would.
If I may, through the chair, maybe just defer to Mike as to the value of the board identifying a budget amount that is being forwarded to council.
Yeah, you gotta keep in mind that the 10.9 million on the 2023 budget is a snapshot in time, right? And the idea is that if you feel comfortable with that range, if you're saying, no, Mike, it's gotta be 8, then I'd be like, okay, we gotta pivot. But we can pivot in design development. It is that to keep moving forward. We haven't been working on the project. We don't have consultants engaged. So the true costs really aren't known until you tender the project out. That's the actual value. But the idea is that how comfortable are you at each of the checkpoints, if you will. So whether you decide to let council know that it's 10 point, I mean, they can just watch this too, right? It's 10.9, right, at the moment, but it might be 10.1 in the end. It might be 9, it might be 11. You gotta figure out where your comfortability factor is, right?
Well, you make a good point. This is a public meeting and council can just look at the videotape and see what it is. So that's why I'm saying that we could actually include in the council package the spreadsheets that we have looked at, and the council can get that for information. But I mean, what we're stating now is that the mayor's motion, and I don't know if we need, did we pass that already?
No, but I have a comment,
Okay,
and I just, sorry, every once in a while I get a light bulb. The issue is, I wonder if I should add the verbiage, the design as presented. Because if you don't present the design, they could in fact do that, come back and say, here's $5 million, build a Quonset hut for. So I think I would want to put the language in there, Chair, if I may, to say, like the design as presented. Because I think then you're saying this is a design we like, whatever that may cost. I think if you just say, we want a renovation, council could come back and say, well, here's your budget, right? So
Does the seconder agree to that change? Okay.
I think we should add that in there.
changes
Well,
are-
Design as presented.
Yeah, Mr. Holt.
I don't want to make things more complicated, because that's a very good point, but as we work on the design and we engage more with the police services, the design will morph, right? Like we only got it to a point where we were comfortable to get it out for costing, but once we get, for instance, like your ID team, their analysis, so the specificity of the design would change. So just, as long as you're not saying this, you're pigeoned into exactly this, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah, but I guess the point is that at least there's a line in the sand, or there's a stake, right? That, it's not a Quonset hut.
Might I
for one.
suggest then scope of the current design?
Scope of the current.
Yeah, I think that would make more sense, because like the reality of our work going forward is potentially like 6 months. If we were hired tomorrow, that's how much design, development, construction drawings, tender takes. It's about 6 months for this size of a project. Right?
Okay,
That's
I'll
prior to
call a
tender.
vote. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. Any other comments before we proceed to another agenda item? Member Hahn and then the mayor.
Sorry.
I did have, and this doesn't reflect at all in the motion that we just brought forward. I had 2 questions. I wanted to know if there was a relocation expense. Sorry, I couldn't see all the fine lines during the 1-year anticipated construction. And I'm thinking about, is there a relocation of a department that's required? Has that all been brought forward? It might be outside of the building renting.
Great question. The idea with the renovation and the strategy of really moving deck chairs from somewhere in the existing. For instance, a great example, I closed it down, but the communications center, that's going to move into the addition, right? It's going to get larger, right? You're taking calls there. It has to stay in full operation until the new is constructed and we can make the switch over. So there is no change to that level of service, if you will. All other aspects, the idea is that they would stay on site, you would build the new, and then you would shift things around. So there's a construction sequencing or phasing, if you will, of the project. So it has been thought about in the design, because that's typically what I do up front. It's not like what we had to do for the fire hall, right? Fire hall is operational right now while you're building the new one basically in front. That's why the design is what it is. You're still able to fight fires, at least in one direction, you can drive through the building, but it's close enough. So the same idea, that strategy is all worked through in schematic design, but also through design development as we continue along the road.
My second question was in regards to future needs. And I know that since the 23 presentation that was brought forward, our communication department has taken on a new contract. And I liked your comments about how big these communication desks are. And if I'm correct, I think I see in your schematic, roughly, am I seeing right, 5 desks? Is that correct?
Correct, yeah, we designed the space for future growth. You don't want to design just for the needs of today. You gotta think future forward. So spatially, we're showing the Bramick supervisor desk. These are to scale, designed as we have for the London Police Department, as I mentioned. So we want to make sure we have enough space for what you need now, but also in the future. You don't want to euchre yourself and then realize that you should have made the building bigger.
That was my question, since we took on that additional contract this past September. So I'm going to go back to the chief. Can you let me know, with the additional contract, how many desks are we currently using?
So through the chair to Member Hunt, so currently we have squeezed in 4 workstations into that current space. 3 of them sit about as close as the 3 of us are sitting here. So we've reviewed the new anticipated space and feel like that room provides us the needed expansion facility.
So for the future, you're very, very comfortable. I think I see 4, but I believe I see 5.
So there's 4, plus there's a supervisor desk, which is kind of in the bottom corner. And there's space as well to add a 6. So strategically, we've left additional space there for you to grow. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Just real quick, 'cause I know the clock's ticking. Just a comment to the team, to the chief, to Mike, and even to the director. Is gonna have to sell this to not only the council and to the public. So asking, this chair features and benefits. When you're looking at the addition, think of the benefits of each space. I think in terms of things like a mental health room, there's a benefit to that, to the WSIB. So just, when we do it, if you could help with the verbiage and the understanding, there's a benefit, whether it's regulatory and in policing, that the space isn't adequate. So rather than looking at it holistically as a whole, even each space, as I know member Paul can tell you, the mental health space is very important at paramedic, right? So that will help the board overall. If you look at each space and think, what is the benefit? Whether there's a cost reduction on the garage, because you're leaving the vehicles running. So those kind of things will help us to make the case to the council and the public that there's a real need for it. So again, just one help with that, Chair.
If I may just provide a comment to the mayor's comments. So we heard earlier the inspector of policing is looking to assess response times as part of a tool to see our police services adequate and responsive. The indoor garage facility, as we move into the winter months, provides us a greater opportunity to have our vehicles ready and accessible at a moment's notice, as opposed to in those winter storms going out and brushing off a car prior to leaving the parking lot to get to a potential emergency call. So a great example of being able to tell the story about the needs and requirements of the police service and what we're looking to move into.
Perfect example, Chief, thanks.
Yeah, exactly. Benefits to the community, benefits to the force, benefits to the budget, I think would be a great analysis if we could have that. Okay, well, thank you very much. We'll move on to 7.2, 2025 fees for service. The recommendations of the board receive report POL 2024-23 for information. Can I have a mover and a seconder to get that on the table? Moved by member Hahn, seconded by the mayor. All those in favor? Approved. And any questions or comments on that before we move to the next motion? Seeing none, the recommendation of the board approve the 2025 fees for service schedule. Mover by the mayor, seconded by member Hahn. All those in favor? And that is carried, which takes us to number 8. Reports from departments, and the first item is 8.1, the vehicle allowance report, HR 2024-2022, and the recommendation is that the report, HR 2024-22, vehicle allowance report dated November 19, 2024, be received for information. Can I have a mover and a seconder to get that on the floor? Moved by Matt Hahn, seconded by Hahn. I'm sorry, it's terrible. I'm sorry, it's a mental block. And moved and seconded. All those in favor, it's received for information. And now we'll lead on to the discussion. And I think Director Payne was going to be speaking to this, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning, members of the board. I'll be brief on the report before you. I'll just hit some highlights of the report. So going back into September, the board had asked for, I guess, options with respect to the request for providing a vehicle to the chief. So just to hit the highlights of the report, essentially what I'm doing is providing 4 available options to the board to consider. 1 being a vehicle allowance, 2 providing a service vehicle or a company vehicle at the service. Another option could be expense reimbursements, use your own personal vehicle and getting reimbursements for expenses. The last option could be a mix or a blend of multiple of those. When I talk specifically, I'll give you some highlights of some of the options. So typically leading throughout all the options is whenever a vehicle is used for personal use, it becomes a taxable benefit. So really what that means is taxable benefit. There's an equation that we calculate in payroll, and that's attributed to somebody's pensionable earnings for when we submit to CRA for earnings and what have you. So it becomes a taxable benefit. So essentially, they pretty much speak for themselves. The vehicle allowance, it's a lump sum payment paid to an employee for the allowance to use a vehicle. Typically, it can be either or, just for work related or business, or sorry, personal as well. And again, when you have a business and personal together, again, it goes into equations. We have to separate that and figure out a value for CRA, what the taxable benefit portion is. But essentially that's it. I'll talk a little later about the vehicle allowance amounts. Next option is a company vehicle or a service vehicle, whatever you may call it. That's a vehicle that's provided to a member, that's left in the workplace and used for work items only. So picked up and dropped off at the workplace at the end of every day. The caveat to that is it can be exercised as personal options as well, or personal use. Again, same idea for CRA. We have to figure out the taxable benefit implications, if you will. Lastly is the other option would be expense reimbursement. So you use your own vehicle for work-related activities, and we have a reimbursement process or policy that would fall in place. You need reimbursement for work-related activities. Okay. So as I go into, as I said earlier, amounts, the chief has been gracious, worked with the chief to get some other amounts from different services. So in the first chart on the what's happening in some of our comparators, so that listing is what we use for comparators when we bargain with our police service. So these are some of the services we use for comparative purposes. So you can see it's a mixed bag, if you will, with respect to no continuity of standard amounts or what have you. So essentially in the service comparators, we're about half and half. Half provide a vehicle allowance or access to a service vehicle, and the other half provide a vehicle allowance amount, which I've identified there. For other information purposes, some other services that pay different amounts, show in the chart as well. I'll really wrap it up with, there's pros and cons for each of those options if the board so chooses, whatever option. It's really up to the board's purview where they go with that. I think the biggest thing, there's a few things the board needs to consider from a personal use for vehicles, from the taxable benefit provision. That's a pensionable earnings, so that increases pensionable earnings. And I only say that because pensionable earnings, there's EHD, there's different mandatory benefit costs that we pay on top of that. OMERS is one of them, pension. So that's important to know. But really there's no wrong or right, it's really what the board decides. Just hearing out from administrative side, there's a little bit more work to figure out the taxation, but that's part of what we do. So, yeah, so open to any questions if the board may have them. So.
Okay, and as chair, I'd say that right now we have a couple of options in how we proceed. We could move towards authorizing a specific option here today, or we could get a couple off the table, leave to think about it and come back and have a more detailed report at another time. So I throw that open now to comments and questions by members of the board on this item. Are there any questions, any comments? Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I will just tell you, Chair, I'm in favor of option 2, but need some more information. I lived that life for 20 years, whether it's a service or a company vehicle, but I did hear Director Payne, did you say that the vehicle would stay on site? I thought I heard you say that.
Yes, through the chair to the mayor. Yes, correct. So current state, and correct me if I'm wrong, chiefs, you have a service vehicle that stays at the station today. It's an admin vehicle, if you will. That's what I'm saying. It can become personal, but you can take it home. But the minute you take a work vehicle home, that's a personal element. So to and from work is not a work. If I drive to work, pick the vehicle up, it's non-taxable. But if I take the vehicle home, it becomes taxable, right? So there's just different implications, and they're fine. But that's how we have it set up today. I believe the vehicle sits at the station, correct me if I'm wrong, chiefs, and they pick it up to and from.
So just follow I'm, your comment about further information, I just say I'm in favor of option 2. I just need to understand the cost of what the service vehicle would be. So that's just my comment, Chair.
Thank you very much. Member, Member Hahn?
Could you elaborate on option number 1? Could that vehicle be taken home and a fixed amount determined, preset by the board, and that vehicle could be taken home? We don't have to worry about anything. If we determine it's 7,500 or 5 or 10, it just, the whole amount becomes a taxable benefit.
Great question through the chair to Member Hahn. So that is correct. You can take, so vehicle allowance, if that's an option, you can even do that for a service vehicle. You can allow it to go home. But your question specifically, yes, an amount is provided for an allowance. That vehicle can go home. If there's a personal, I guess the big piece is if there's a personal element used to it, that's where we just have to figure out the equation of what's work-related versus what's personal. So yes, it can be.
The reason I like that option is every, as you can appreciate, he's on kind of call 24/7. And again, to go back to the office and pick up the service vehicle only to find out it's not there and to sign it out ahead of time. I like the flexibility of option 1 and whatever that amount is, and maybe we can ask for further information. But I like it that there's a designated vehicle that the chief has, and that on short notice or, you know, going to these meetings out of town, he's not signing out a service vehicle.
Thank you very much. Member Hall, any comments?
Nothing specific. I think I'm kind of leaning towards Member Hahn's for the number 1. Just like she said, the ease of use. He already has the vehicle, and we're just kind of reimbursing him for his use, and he can use it anytime he wants. That's kind of where I'm at right now.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Merrick?
I'll just make the motion, and we'll get some clarity on option 2, that we proceed with more information on option 1 and option 2.
You making that a motion?
I'm making that motion.
Do you have a seconder? Okay, seconded by Member Hahn. All those in favor? Okay. Thank you. So maybe at the next meeting, we could have a breakdown of the relative benefits and features of 1 and 2, and we can anticipate a decision perhaps at the next meeting. And that's to everybody's satisfaction. Wonderful. And now we go on to other business. The Inspector of Policing, information collection. I'll do a brief verbal report and maybe ask Ron if he wants to comment on this.
8.2.
Oh, 8.2, just that the board compensation review be received for information. Is that what you wanted?
Yeah, and I think Bill has a report.
I'm sorry, board compensation review. I was getting ahead of myself. You're quite right. 8.2, board compensation review. Recommendation that the report be received for information. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Member Hall, second by Member Hahn. All those in favor, thank you. And we throw it over to the Director of Finance, and my apologies for overlooking that on the agenda.
No worries. Money's always the last thing we talk about. Through the chair to the board. So at the last meeting, there was discussion about board compensation. So we did reach out and get some information. One was a little more, I would say, informative than the other. So I would say the information that we got from the Elgin board was a little more informative because it came up with actually numbers and stuff. The other Zone 6 survey really didn't have a lot when it came to the numbers. So what I did is basically put in the report the comparison. So you can sort of see these are based on 21 numbers. So even if you were to add increases to each of these, you can see that Strathroy-Caradoc kind of sits at the upper end of board remuneration. And just according to the legislation, I've included that as well for your purview, and that was that a municipality our size is held to the fact that they should be at least $300 a year. So we are in excess of that. So I think those two things cover off. So if there's any more information that the board would require to either increase the allotment to the board, or if they're content with the information that's provided, I'll just leave that with the board.
Any comments or questions? Member Hahn?
And thank you very much for that report, Bill. I was looking at that comparison, and do you know, like I know Tim Center there mentioned that they hold 4 meetings a year. Do all of the other ones that were presented hold 12 per year, or are there some that hold 6 per year every other month?
That information I don't have at hand, and I can dive into that deeper and just find out for sure what that is, but I don't have that, unfortunately, with me.
I also know that at that convention we were at, they indicated, and I do like this, all-encompassing factor, meaning whether you're attending, you know, another meeting, whether it's a zone meeting or whether it's a convention or whether it's the strategic planning session. I do like that it's an all one fee, meaning you do the work that's required for you for the job. It's much easier than per meeting. I do, though, appreciate, and maybe if I'm correct, I don't know, that if it's like, I'm just looking at the member, 3250, if it was that it is divided by 12, and that does mean that there's an expectation that you're attending, like that it's per month. You know, you've attended the meeting. Do you know what I'm saying? So that if all of a sudden I'm sick, let's say, for 2 out of the 12 meetings or whatever, I don't feel that I should be compensated for if I'm not attending the meeting. So that's one comment based on attending meetings. And then and because we don't know what the other number of meetings that these boards attend per year, I liked what I believe you said, Bill, was that it was that maybe in 2025, this is just a proposal that I believe we accepted at the last meeting, it's linked to the cost of living, and the increases rise parallel with council. I believe we accepted that at our last meeting, so I would like to, am I correct, was that accepted? If I was reading the minutes, it appeared like the board accepted that. If we could proceed with that for January 1st, so the cost of living to go on that amount, and that it increases parallel with council. That was the wording from the minutes.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if we passed that or if we found out that that was already the policy. I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't believe it was a policy because we haven't increased for over 6 years.
So you're making a motion that the police board remuneration be linked to the increases percentage-wise that are received by council. Is that your motion?
John, it was in the meeting.
It was passed?
Sure we did.
It was passed, okay. Because I think that's not, okay, so it was passed. Thank you very much for that, Claire. So that's been done.
I thought that's how I read it.
Okay.
So this report was for information to support that motion that we passed last month.
So our information item is here and the action item has already taken place.
Yes. And the only other one I brought forward, it's up to the board though, is it based on attending the meeting?
Right, and we can leave that for a future discussion? Or?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm all right.
Super,
I
okay.
don't mind.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that. So that would be the end of 8.2, because we received that for information. And now we'll move on to other business, which I jumped ahead to before. The Inspector of Policing information collection, I graciously, we had a document printed out. I didn't know it would be quite that long. The Inspector of Policing had an in-service the other day, a little presentation that the board's chairs went to. it was less than an hour, and there was a slide deck which I think has been provided here for members to take a look at. And essentially, inspector of policing is collecting a lot of information, and we're required to do things. Ron, I don't know if you wanted to speak to this before we discuss it, but I'll give you that option, and we have the slide deck if you want to reference it as well. So I'll turn it over to you if you like.
Yeah, so related to the information collection, I just want to give you a bit of a landscape of what the inspectorate entails in terms of how it's different from being part of the Solicitor General's office. So the inspectorate is actually made up of different pillars. One of those pillars, of course, is the advisory pillar, to which I am a member. There's also the inspection pillar, where employees are responsible for conducting inspections. We've already had a couple of inspections related to public order units, major case management follow-up, that type of thing. And then the third is investigations. And investigations is responsible for those complaints that come in regarding either board or chief or deputy chief behavior. As the chief already alluded to, we already have 300 plus complaints sitting in the queue for our, I think, 6 investigators to go through. So they're quite busy. To my knowledge, Strathroy-Caradoc has not had any complaints, which is a very positive thing for Strathroy-Caradoc. The fourth pillar is our data management. And the thought behind the data management is that through the use of collection of data on an ongoing basis that's structured and planned out, we will be able to come up with examples of excellence in policing. So what you've received so far in terms of requests for data is really just the fundamental information that will, basically provide the foundation of where data management goes. For example, they ask, have you done business reports? Have you done strategic planning? The answers, of course, are yes, you have. But I mean, if there's an agency that came back and said, no, they haven't, that would obviously be a compliance issue, and we would address that. So that's where we're really at in terms of, we're at the very preliminary stages of data collection, and I'm certainly willing to answer any questions that anybody may have.
Okay, thank you for that, Ron. And as I see it then, we have 2 things we're supposed to do. One is a police service board's information form, and I think it has something like, 71 questions on it. And we were given a timeline that we have to have things done by November 25th to get submitted by January 8th. So when I ask about the police service board information form, it is the idea that the police chief and the chair of the board sit down together and complete this and submit it online, or is this something that the board does together and we have to, compile our responses and then, approve that it be sent in? I don't know how formal the process is.
Yeah, I think at this stage, it's just a simple matter of completing the questionnaire. I don't think it's a question of having the entire board participate in that completion. A lot of the information here, I'm just gonna pull up.
I'm just wondering, is this an administrative task that the chief can see to, because he's going to have
It really is, or, your board secretary. It's really that type of information. I don't think it's gonna, it seems like it's daunting at 71 questions, but I think most of the information that they're asking for is readily available.
Okay, that's what I wanted clarification on then. Moving forward then, as a police board chair, would I just look at our police secretary and our chief and say, you know, we need the three of us to sit down one day and just see that this gets done? Or is this something I can leave to the chief and the police secretary to complete together?
Yeah, so as an example, if you look, question 4 is please specify the composition of police services board by entering the number of board members. That's very simple. And it's just, so for me, it's very simple. Like, you obviously know the composition of your board, but this is about making sure the right data, the people that work in data management are in the field, so they're not dealing directly with boards. So, and then the next question is please specify the number of vacancies. So you have 1 vacancy at the moment that was just created, right? So it's a moment in time, and I think most of the information is readily available in your head already without doing a lot of research.
So for the first of those 2 items, then the police service board information form, I think we're good on, we know how to proceed. The policing insight statement looks to be more involved as we go through the slide deck, because it has essentially essay answers, 500 words, 500 words, 500 words, you know, when we're taking a look at, you know, slides 10 and 21 on that slide deck. Is that a type of activity? I mean, we have to compile answers here. Like, what are the most impactful initiatives the board has implemented within the last 2 years? Have these initiatives positively impacted the board's governance? Compiling an answer like that, is it expected that a police board chair is going to canvass the board members for their responses? I take these, put them into some kind of Word document, review it with the chief, come back to the board, get the approval for an answer, and then submit it? I mean, I don't know how to...
Certainly, Chair, whatever process you like to follow on that. I mean, what's the most important thing that you've undertaken? I think if you look to your business plan, your strategic planning, those things should be highlighted in those documents, right? That's my recommendation, is you use those documents as a foundation.
Okay, I guess my problem is we have a November 25th to January 8th input time where we have to, basically we have to have a hard copy document ready so that when we sit down at the link, open the link, we have to input what's been written. So, you know, answers of, you know, 473 words or whatever it is, or, you know, and there's one that's even longer. I don't know if I'm comfortable composing these on my own with the chief and then just submitting them on behalf of the board without having the board approve them. And I don't know if I'm comfortable with not giving the board an opportunity to basically submit. So we've been given this task, a short time frame, and we have not really been given by the inspectorate a suggested process. Are we to devise our own process, or is there a recommended process by the inspectorate that they wish to see boards follow to compile these answers so that they know that they're getting something and who it's coming from? Like, it's not me sitting down by myself and writing these out and submitting it without consulting anybody, I don't think. I don't know if it's just me and the chief sitting down and writing it up. I'm wondering, you know, given the short time frame, do you have recommendations about how we should proceed, and has this been a subject of discussion at the inspectorate?
No, it's not been a subject of discussion. This is the first board that's brought it up, but my recommendation would be that it really lies at the chair's discretion as to how the chair wishes to proceed. Whether the chair wants to fill out the document and prior to submitting have his board members look at it for any further comment or feedback, or if you want to have all members submit something to you for you to work on. Obviously, we respectfully request that you comply with the deadline.
Okay, that's all I need to know then. So at this point, then, I thank you for your input, and I look to my board, and I say, if we go to the slide deck that was provided, we go to page 10 of 21, Police Insight Statement Survey Questions, Part A, General Questions, and there are several items here that I think might be subject to opinion or considered to be subjective based upon some evidence. But I see each of these 3 questions under Part A, General Questions, as questions which I believe I would like to receive input from each board member on, and they are are specifically, what are the most impactful initiatives the board has implemented within the last 2 years? How have these initiatives positively impacted the board's governance? Number 2, internal issues and challenges. What are the most challenging internal issues the board is currently experiencing? How will these internal challenges impact the board's future planning? And number 3, external issues and challenges. What are the most challenging external issues the board is currently experiencing in the community? How will these external challenges impact?
What page are you looking at, Chair? 'Cause
I'm
they're-
looking at the slide deck that was provided in the,
Because the numbers are a little bit different.
no, it's not in the hard copy.
Oh, it's in the
We
deck.
moved from.
Okay, got it.
That is the police
Got
service
it.
board information
Yeah.
form. We're
Yeah, I
looking at
saw
the
it.
slide deck that was provided, and we're now moving on to
Got it. Thank
the
you.
police insight statement.
Got it.
Sorry, I should have been more specific.
Nope, I should pay attention.
So the idea is that now that we're looking at the policing insight statement, here we go. We have these essay form questions, and if we look at slide 10 of 21, there's the general questions. And I'm suggesting that within the next week or two, if each member of this board could fire off to me bullet points that they think should be included, and then what I would do is I would sit down with the chief, look at these bullet points, and compile an answer that we believe reflects the opinions stated by the board and what the chief thinks is going on. Chief?
If I may, Chair, so the board secretary and I have had initial discussions about meeting either later today or tomorrow. I think a vast majority of the questions, I think we can probably provide some answers regarding the survey. I don't disagree with your suggestion that maybe the board members provide some input regarding some of the training and other questions that you've referenced so far. But I think that we'll get a majority of the way through the survey, probably by sometime this week, if Jen has time available. I think a majority of those questions from pages 1 to 10, I think that we can get through.
Yeah, I was looking at like part B and part C. I see those as being more administrative in nature. And I wasn't going to suggest that part B and part C would get input for the rest of the board. But part A, general questions, I think, and I'm not asking people to write the 500 words, just the bullet points. And any work that can be done by the chief and the secretary in advance is fantastic, so we can meet our deadline. But I would like an opportunity to sit down with the chief and the secretary to look at specifically part A, the general questions, having in hand the bullet points from the board members so that we can see that maybe there's no gap in our response, and so that, and it may be that you've anticipated all the points that are raised by the board members, that's fantastic, but if there is a point made by 3 board members that, or 2 board members that isn't in the general questions, then we consider including it in the answer. So I'm just looking at a way forward, because it was not outlined to us, and November 25th comes pretty fast, and we have to input by January 8th.
Yeah, certainly at the call of the chair, I'm available to meet with yourself and the board secretary to do a final review and sign off on the survey.
Yeah, so with the, if the members of the board could just look at those 3 questions, fire off bullet points to me, then I'll contact the chief and the secretary, and they're far busier than I am, but we can sit down, we can take a look at what they've prepared. And I'm going to ask the board this: do you need to have these responses in their final form come back at the next meeting before they are submitted, or can we submit them when they are completed? What's the wish of the board? Mayor?
Chair, I'm going to apologize for my question in advance, but I will, and I apologize to the chief. But I have a question to Ron from the inspectorate, if you can hear me, Ron. Is the purpose of this survey to gauge the temperature of the board itself and the board's feelings, or of the police service itself?
The board.
The board?
This is directed towards the board, and your governance.
Okay, thank you. So my apologies to my board members. This is a board initiative. It's to be done for the board. So I just wonder, and I'll apologize, I hate apologizing to the chief, about the appropriateness of having the chief participate in this. He can be a resource, but I'm looking at this, Ron, this is a board activity, so I'm reading words in there that are talking about the board and not the police service itself. And I don't know if you knew where I was going with that question, but so to answer your question directly, I'd like the board should sign off on it. This is a gauge of how the board feels about our activities, not how the police service feels about the activities. Correct, Ron?
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, well, with that in mind, the idea of collecting information from board members, should I sit down with the chief and the secretary to compile answers to these, and then they come back for our next board meeting to then be examined by the board to see if this is what we want to submit? That's what I'm asking the board and the chief. Chief?
Yes, sir, if I may, Chair. So I'm willing to provide my time to help the board secretary gather information that is more administrative in nature to help complete this survey. There are elements to this survey that, as the mayor has outlined, are the board's perspectives, and this is a board survey that the inspectorate is collecting. I will say that there is a second survey, a corresponding survey that all police services are required to complete, which we're undertaking as well, which are more service oriented, including complement numbers, budget numbers, things such as what record system we utilize, which again is all being collected by the analytics team at the Inspectorate of Policing to create a baseline for every service in the province. So there is two very distinct surveys, one service oriented, one board oriented. Again, my willingness to assist Jen in collecting the administrative data for the board survey is what I'm committing to offer.
Okay, point well made. And so I think that's the intent. We want to have administrative support for information, especially say in Part C, response times. And adequate and effective policing. I mean, there are things in there that we're going to have, information that we're probably going to need. What information and approach does the board use and apply to assess the adequacy and effectiveness of the police service in the following areas?
So to answer your question, Chair?
Yeah.
We should come back to the board for final sign off.
Exactly.
Yes.
But and that's what I'm suggesting.
Yeah,
so
right.
for the December meeting, it comes back. But between now and then, we got to get something done fast.
Yeah.
So I will ask all members of the board in the next week or so, go through this, and in Part A, give me your bullets. Part B, anything you have to contribute, it'd be greatly appreciated for consideration. Anything you have to say about the questions of response times, you can fire me a bullet. I will then sit down with the chief and the secretary. We will compile a document of 500 words for this answer and 500 words for that answer, etc. And we'll come back to the December meeting, and hopefully we'll be able to distribute it before then, because maybe if we can distribute it before then, we can do an edit or two. And at some point after November 25th, we need to be able to sit down, open the link, and input the answers that had been passed by the board. Okay, so that's the process. So I'm giving you homework, and over the next week, please fire those off to it. I'll work with the chief and our secretary, and hopefully at the next meeting, we'll be able to look at a document that you've already seen that'll come back to you, hopefully via email. And then when it comes to opening a link and inputting it, that's an administrative task that I think the secretary would be able to take care of with her department. Okay, is that fine for everybody?
Yes.
Okay, great, because there hasn't been a lot of direction on this. It just kind of came out, and we had a fun 45 minutes learning about it online, and great. Okay, thank you for your assistance on that, Ron. And there's nothing really as a motion there, it's just homework. Okay, inquiries or comments by members today? Any? Seeing none, scheduled meetings Tuesday, December 17th, 10 a.m., Tuesday, January 21st, 10 a.m., Tuesday, February 18th, 10 a.m. And that December 17th meeting is the one where we have to approve the answers to our questions so that we can send them off by January the 8th. So there is a, something. Okay, fantastic. Adjournment recommended on November 20th, 2024. Police Services Board meeting adjourned at 11:57. Moved by Member Hahn, seconded by Member Hall. All those in favor? Thank you very much. Thank you for attending, Ron. Thank you, Chief, Deputy Chief, and Directors. And